Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ReggieCon, our first panel actually of this semester, and we're going to discuss After the Rain in celebration of Black History Month. This is our first ReggieCon panel again for this spring semester, but we have more exciting panels for all of you to look forward to coming in the future. My name is Jana Albrecht, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Illinois State University. Before we begin the panel, I do have a few details to ensure that everything's going to run a little bit smoothly. So first thing is we do record the session, and it will be posted to the ReggieCon website. Second, some of you may need confirmation of attendance for your class tonight, and we'll get that link posted a little bit later on in the panel presentation so you can complete that. Third, the presenters' video and audio are on, but they can't hear or see any guests. So that said, we'll monitor the Q&A function. So we do encourage you to ask the questions now and often throughout the presentation because it's one of our panelists' favorite things to do is to answer your questions, but they may not get to those right away, just so you know. Last update is we do hope that you'll check the ReggieCon website early and often because you can see previous panels there and you can stay informed about what's coming up for future panels. So enough of the housekeeping, we'll get to the good stuff. At this time, I am pleased to introduce our fearless leader, Dr. Scott Jordan. Dr. Jordan is the chair of psychology here at Illinois State, and he also happens to be our moderator and a panelist for tonight's discussion of After the Rain. Scott, take it away.
Thank you much. Thank you so much, Jana, and welcome everyone to ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, what's your story? I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty. I'm a cognitive psychologist philosopher here at Illinois State University. And tonight we come together to celebrate Black History Month with a discussion of the megascope graphic novel, After the Rain, an adaptation of Dr. Nnedi Okorafor's amazing short story, One for the Road. Joining me on tonight's celebration is that motley crew of comic and pop culture aficionados, purveyors of all things geekdom, the ReggieCon crew. First, the one, the only, the incomparable queen of geekdom, Dr. Vanessa Hintz. Vanessa, please come on in, say hi, and tell everybody a little something about what you do.
Good day, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Hello, everyone. Welcome to ReggieCon. I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, a DEI professional, and yes, queen of the nerds. And I'm very excited to be celebrating Black History Month with you all today, so welcome.
Fantastic. Also on the ReggieCon crew, psych geek aficionado, Dr. Eric Wesselmann. Eric, please come on in, tell the audience a little something about who you are and what you do.
Dr. Eric Wesselmann. I'm a social psychology professor, and I love talking about psychology. I love all things nerdy, and whenever I can connect them, I do. And I love having nerdy conversations.
Fantastic. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce the first of tonight's special guests. First, brother story himself, the one, the only doctor of all things comics, Dr. Stanford Carpenter. Stanford, please come into the Zoom room, say hi, and tell everybody a little something about what you do.
Hello, how are you? I am Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm coming to you out of Chicago. I'm also chair of the Black and Brown Comic Arts Festival and the manager of community engagement at the Oriental Institute at University of Chicago.
Excellent. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to welcome to tonight's ReggieCon panel, the one, the only Hugo Award-winning author of After the Rain, Professor John Jennings. John, please come on into the Zoom room, tell the audience a little something about who you are. Tell us a little something about Megascope and the career choices that led you to After the Rain.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. Everybody else knows that. Anyway, all right. Hello. Thank you. I'm coming directly front to you from Riverside, California, in the Inland Empire, as they say. I'm a professor of media and cultural studies, where I teach classes on Afrofuturism and aesthetics, Afrofuturism and horror, which I'm teaching right now, and Afrofuturism and the politics of the Black superhero, and also an intro to comics class, and probably soon like media methodology probably next year. But anyway, that's what I do in the academy for right now. I'm also director and curator of Megascope, Abrams Megascope, which is a line of graphic novels dedicated to stories and creators of color, so BIPOC creators across the board, primarily focusing on speculative fiction. So that's science fiction, fantasy, horror, magical realism, all the good things that are strange and otherworldly. But we also do crime fiction and also some historical fiction as well. So as far as like how I came to After the Rain, I'm really good friends with Nnedi Okorafor. We actually went to the same school at the same time. We didn't meet too much later. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, right? And what happened was we became fast friends. And I think by the time I moved to Buffalo, I taught at the University of Buffalo, SUNY, for about 6 years in graphic design. That's my training as a graphic designer primarily. And I read a short story, On the Road, and I forgot where I saw it. I don't know if it was in her collection or had I seen it online or somewhere. And I was like, hey, this is like maybe a decade ago. I really love this story. It has a horror vibe to it. I mean, Nnedi really has become very, she's not as keen on horror as she used to be. She used to be an avid, consumer of horror back in the day, but there's something about this story that was just so compelling to me. And it was an early story of hers. She doesn't do a lot of short stories. And I just saw so much of her in the story. And the other thing is I also felt that you could see like the beginnings of what would become her oeuvre, so to speak, much later, right? And I just really loved it. And so I asked her, could I adapt it into a graphic novel? And she was like, sure, because she had the rights to it. And, lo and behold, started working on it. But then Damien Duffy and I ended up doing Kindred, ended up getting married, moved across the country, blah, 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 all the things.
A whole lot of things.
All the other things. And so I ended up reaching out to my friend David Brame, who was the artist on it. And I said, hey, if I color this, if I adapt this and color it, and because I'm uncredited colorist on the book, by the way. I don't know why I'm uncredited. Well, that's it.
Because the colors are amazing, man.
Thank you.
Absolutely amazing.
I love it. I love the way it turned out. And I was like, I don't know why they didn't say, hey, John did this book. Colors, whatever. It was important to get it out. But so it just seemed when I got a chance to do Megascope that it would be a great, because of Nnedi's status as one of the top like science fiction fantasy writers probably in the world right now. I thought like it'd be a great book to launch a new line with. So that is the long and short of it, And and then it came out and it was, nominated for an Eisner, nominated for a Locus Award, voted one of the best novels of the year, all that kind of stuff in the middle of a pandemic. By the way, don't launch an imprint in the middle of a global pandemic. I would not advise you to do that.
Yeah.
Not good.
Well, I'm glad all of that happened because I have to tell you, I think I bought a copy out in San Diego last summer and read it on the plane home. And as you'll see, I'm using it in a class right now. You and I have talked about it a little bit in the past. There's incredible notions of construction, deconstruction, reorganization that are just near and dear to my heart. So I'm thrilled we're here. Let me explain a little bit about how ReggieCon does this. I've asked each of the ReggieCon guests, other than John himself, to pick their favorite panel from the graphic novel. I'm going to show that panel. They're going to explain to you why it was their favorite. And then I'll stop sharing and we'll all talk about that for a bit. And we'll move on to the next one and take it from there. So the first panel we're going to discuss. Oh, before we actually do panels, by the way, I always do this, jumping the gun. We need to thank those people real quick here at ISU who make us look like we know what we're doing, right? So as you all met, Jonna Albrecht, she works in enrollment management and student services. They fully support what we do at ReggieCon. Couldn't do it without them. Mr. Sean Thornton does all of the amazing graphic work for ReggieCon month in, month out. By the way, Sean won an international award for the logo he created for ReggieCon. So he does amazing work. Awesome. And then Miss Danny Schroeder works in the ISU, I got the word management in my head, but it's the wrong word, advertising department. And Miss Summer Simmons, she makes sure that we're all doing what we need to do paperwork-wise to make sure this happens. So we very much thank them for the work. And we're going to start with Eric.
Alrighty, so I cheated. I picked several panels. In addition to being a huge comic fan, I was a cinema studies minor, so long-time film buff, and so I think in film terms. And so this entire sequence of panels just really captured me. I'm a huge horror fan of all the genres, and so we have the main character. She, before this, the first page, she opens the door and sees someone standing there and is startled, shuts the door, and then goes through this process of thinking, opening up the door again to make sure that she really saw what she did see. We see this, the camera, if you will, getting closer and closer. As you get more zooming in, the emotional intensity gets ratcheted up. I also love how at the two bottom panels on that first page, you start getting this sort of almost like skewed, canted camera angle, which is often used in cinema to really kind of unsettle the audience. You then cut out to what she's looking at. You start with this sort of this view of this young man's feet, pans up, you get her reaction, and then you get the full reveal in this splash page of sorts. And boom. So I didn't expect horror elements, right? Usually when you watch a horror film, the title, the poster, all of that gives that away. But the cover of After the Rain, I mean, there was some sort of whimsical nature of the hands, but beyond that, I didn't know what to expect. And so, boom, I went, wow, Pet Sematary. Okay. All right. And I was hooked from this moment onward. And so this amazing use of genre tropes and violation of my expectations as a reader. And then I was sucked in.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I gotta say, following up on Eric, I got intense Junji Ito vibes reading this bit, right? Because he's all about the final page turn and shocking you with what you're looking at. And the buildup, as Eric said, was simply fantastic. And then to start it off this way, it's like, damn, what's next? I mean, that's not the end. So
yeah, I mean, that's on Nnedi, man. She's the one. We just basically wanted to get across the feel that she had in the story. That's, if you read the short story, that's how it jumps off. So we added very little.
So I do have a quick question to follow up on what Eric said. The issues that Eric described regarding camera angles and frames and that such. Were you in conversation with the artist in terms of how this is going to play out? Okay. Constantly. So you didn't just hand him a script and he'll listen.
No, not at all. Not at all. Actually, I had actually made several attempts on the story. If you look at the soft cover, you'll see like a lot of designs and initial pages that I had done. I tried it different ways, and it was going to be a lot. I was using like actual models. It was a lot more realistic, and so because I wanted. When the strangeness came in, I wanted the groundedness of an act like people that looked more quote unquote realistic, so to speak. But again, that process is very arduous, and I wanted to do the book, and I knew that I wasn't going to draw it anytime soon, so I had to have help on it. So we actually, collaborated on it very closely. But I actually had a lot of the breakdowns done already. That's the other thing too. Like I said, I wanted, or maybe most of them. I think I had maybe 90 pages of the book done.
Yeah,
we extended a little bit, but and of course David took those and
so. Well, I had to ask because I'll be honest with you, John, these illustrations just look like your style.
Right.
I hope you take that as a compliment, but
no,
this very much looks like Parable and Kindred.
It's a great compliment. I think David's he's almost like a chameleon, and as far as like just how he draws. But also like I did the finishes. So, a lot of the finishes are like my hand, right? So I did all the colors, things of that nature. So, my coloring style is my style, so.
Yeah, very cool. Anyone else want to comment on these images? I'm not getting it yet. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to Eric's point, because I too am a huge horror fan. And I was not ready. I was kind of like skimming through the book, like, okay, how long is this going to take me to read? And I saw that that reveal, and I was like, I had to stop and get myself prepared to read the rest, because I was not ready. Like, that image is like seared in my mind. And there's also an image of the boy, and he's like smiling.
Yes.
So I actually had to step away. I wasn't like, what's next? I was like, let me gather myself, because it was a lot, in a good way, in a very good way.
No, thank you. That's one of the highest compliments I've heard.
Yes, it was amazing. I just had to get myself in the zone, because I wasn't in the zone.
I appreciate that. No, it's so hard to scare people with comics because of, they're not immersive in the same way that film is. You don't have like a score or like, particular music, or like sound effects that you can hear and, things like that. So you have to rely on the, like the camera angles and also just the grotesquerie of drawings,
Yeah.
And the page turn. Page turn is a big part of it too, so our toolbox is limited. So I think that's my part of like why I like working in the horror comics so much, because it's so hard to make people feel really unsettled, So
yeah, no, those are great points. The thing is, a movie director is never going to get a page turn, right? I mean, you can pause the show before you think they're about to turn the corner if you want, but it's never. That's why I said this is Junji Ito, top to bottom, bam, it uncanny valley kind of stuff where it fits and doesn't, and makes it macabre and makes you sit with it for a while. Anyone else? Go ahead, man.
What struck me was that was really the interplay between word and image in this. Especially the one where it's the boy with half the head gone, looking up and semi smiling. One of the things I love about comics is that they're inherently surreal. You have multiple states of being represented. You've got the image, you've got the narrative boxes, you've got the word balloons, then and none of them have to match up. And what I think is interesting is in this, none of them match up, right? You've got this picture of the child, but then you've got the smaller inset panel, where it's where she's kind of reaching down to the child, right? So it's like that change in distance. But also, her making reference to being on the south side of Chicago and being a cop, right? Like, for me, as someone who lives in Chicago, like my first thought when I see a cop and that, I'm thinking police violence, right? But we know it's not quite that. But then it's also I felt like in that moment, it just brought all that stuff together in such a way where I imagine so many horrible things being possible at the same time. And I think that was what made it so effective. Like, is this a story that's taking place in Nigeria, or is it really somewhere else? Is this a dream? Is this not a dream? And if it is a dream, what does it really stand for? Like all of that just came together in a really wonderful way for me.
And I think we're going to pick up on that point about where she is as we go further and further into the conversation, because a lot of this makes her be everywhere, and which is very, very cool. So I'm going to go to the next image. I guess I should share it first with you guys. And this is one I picked because none of us picked any images from the deconstruction scene on the road. So I wanted to make sure that we took a moment to discuss that scene, and I'm sort of surprising my colleagues because I just picked this one and they didn't know that I was going to pick it. But this is a scene where her hands have been cut off, and what's happening now is that the vines are actually sewing her hands back together. I just think that the top image there of the women smiling very calmly, she will be fine. There's just sort of an insight there that, juxtaposes the horror that she's going through, which does a very nice job of, they've known the whole time that she's going to go through this. And I love it when they tell her, yeah, but you opened the door a second time. Right? I mean, you're the one that kept looking. You're the one that, I don't want to use the word wanted this, but you're the one who was looking for something, and this is what it is. So I love the way those women ground the intense deconstruction she's going through in that moment. And then I'll shut up there and see if my colleagues want to respond to anything in that image and the whole issue of the deconstruction scene. Okay, then.
Oh.
Go ahead.
So this is only a half-formed thought, but when we talk about deconstruction, reconstruction, I immediately go to Full Metal Alchemist.
Yep.
Right, and the connection that those two have, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about how these two are interconnected, embodied, right, in this character, the tension.
Which one?
You're asking John, right?
Anyone.
No, John, go ahead. I got a lot of views on that.
Is it the tensions between the embodiment of the character and what's now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the embodiment of the character and the sort of tension between construction and deconstruction as a cycle, right? Which is very, very Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah. Okay. I have to say, I don't know Full Metal Alchemist that well. I know it's a thing, but I will say this is that this whole the whole story is obviously about the tensions between someone who is caught between worlds, in this liminal space, and Nnedi calls it being Niger-American. She is the daughter of refugees of the Biafran War, and so her parents were over here studying during that period, and they couldn't go home, and so they ended up moving out to the Chicago suburbs and setting up shop there, and had a family, and but then once they were able to get home safely, they visited, and she actually partially grows up in Nigeria too, right? So she has this kind of like half existence in both spaces, and so with a character like Chioma, I saw that yes, the deconstruction of her body, of her belief structures, of even her past actually, and how it affected her gifts, because obviously she's supposed to be, she's a healer. She has this gift that she kind of blocks through this act of violence, even though it was a violent act that was centered around self-protection. The spirits don't care. Spirits are like, yeah, but you shouldn't have did that, because what you did, you took another life instead of actually saving a life, and because of that, she had to be remade, on the road, in this other space. Because what's interesting too is that this deconstruction aspect happens in like almost like a pocket universe, for a second. Yep. Like when they take her, it's almost like when she goes into the bushes, it's a parallel universe or something, right? Which is really interesting. So, and a lot of this is coming from, Nigerian writers like Ben Okri's work, and also Amos Tutola's work, My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, that kind of stuff, right? So that's where I see that the things coming. And that's actually where the horror lies too, right? Just the lack of control. I said, oh my God, hey, you assaulted your own character. She said, yeah, but it was necessary for her to understand where she needed to be. And I was like, wow, that's hardcore. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to talk about that image?
I mean, what struck me is, on one hand, it's like she's she's being put back together, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got this whole notion of nature as being a place for healing and reconstruction, but the way it's rendered, it's so violent, right? Yes. There's a violence of being put back together, a violence to being healed that and I love that contradiction, right? Because we don't associate violence with healing, and we don't associate and we always think of healing as like this pleasing thing. We don't think of it as being traumatic. And so that was what struck me about this panel.
It was one of my favorite panels too, just from a layout and pacing, and it was a lot of fun to color, as well. So
yeah, I'm very interested in what you just said, Stanford, about a contradiction or or conflict in the idea of healing and trauma or healing and pain. I almost picked the very next page. I'm not going to show you anything, but there's a scene where she's remembering what it smells like to get off of the airplane in Nigeria. And she says, beneath the stench, there was another scent, something distinctly native. There was life and death in that scent, but I was only thinking about death. For me, I don't know that in the culture she's describing, the death and the life are opposite. If there's the tension there, the experience of life entails, I'm not going to say the experience of death. I am going to say that the use of nature here, it's in the Western world, we tend to distinguish ourselves from nature. The whole Christian mission was to transcend nature with rationalism. And even though we may not be Christian in the academy anymore, we're still idea that what I really am is an information soul, and that transcends the laws of physics, and I live forever. And we're still stuck in this transcending nature sort of view. So when I read this, it's like about damn time that we see this kind of talk, this kind of being, where I'm not going to say dying. I'm going to say pain is part of being, and it's just as valid as happiness. And we tend to talk about an approach avoid vibe in this culture. And these women put her on the road. I mean, they literally put her on the road because she has to experience this pain. And that's just not the way we talk about pain here most of the time. So I said, yes, that's it. I'm going to teach that to my students because there's a lot there. I absolutely love it.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else on this? Oh, go ahead, man.
I'm trying to see if there's something else about this panel, about some of the things you said. I know what it was. So there's that idea of like life and death being like, connected and it's like cyclical, So in that sentence, that we the whole idea of like smelling life and death at the same time, that kind of thing. That's what actually gave us the idea for what we call the death flower. And you probably saw it in the first parts of the story. Because like, how do you actually illustrate a smell?
Yeah.
Right. We were like, man, that would be really cool if we could actually symbolically represent that. And so what we came up with was like the flower petals representing life, and then like center of it being like a death's head, like a skull. And so whenever you see her interacting with the smell, she's covering her mouth and she's like about to vomit or whatever, but she's also like have all these flowers around them. And if you look at that, in the middle of it, it's a skull. So it's like, so whenever you see the flower, the death's head flower, whatever, you would realize that sin is present. Yeah, that was the idea.
Even in that image Eric picked with the boy, like he said, inset in that is her reaching out to him, right? So they're both there all the time. Anyone else on this image?
I'll just add something Stanford said really struck me in terms of the violent nature of the story, because it was actually kind of hard for me to read, because when I see violence done against Black women in any way, shape, or form, that my mind associates that with something which is just what you described, Scott, which we don't necessarily associate violence with healing. And so I just wanted to elevate and honor sort of like the parallel process that I'm having right now in really my beliefs about violence being challenged into what you just said in terms of violence is not necessarily a bad thing in this instance. It's like this holistic thing that's happening. But for me, in the moment, when I already told y'all I had to prepare myself because I was scared. And then I start reading this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so violent. This is so violent against this woman, right? And I was kind of like, And, it came around, but I will say that, and that's why I appreciate what you said, Stanford. In the moment when I had to like go through some of those pages kind of fast because I was like, I don't like this because again, I think for me, in the spaces in which I work and what I do, when I think about violence against Black women, it's not in a way that is at all healing. So thank you, Stanford, for saying that, and thank you, John, for writing for putting this work together because I think it presents something to challenge that notion that violence is always this thing to be feared or whatever. So I was just having that parallel process right now as this conversation was going. So I just wanted to elevate that because it was rough a little bit, but this has definitely been like I'm having a healing moment. I feel like right now just listening to this conversation.
No, that's awesome. I mean, and like I said, when I first read it, I was like, my God, Nnedi, what did you do to your character? Reminded me of like how David Butler does her characters sometimes.
Yeah, no joke.
Like, oh my God, you went to hell. Yeah. Like that was just the first level of hell. But let us continue.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. There is a lot of that in there. Like trying to figure out how to mitigate that violence and also figure out ways to, so they understand it presents itself as a horror story, but really isn't a horror story at all. It's actually more of a coming. It's a story of like self-realization, and sometimes realizing who we are is painful, and it can be. I just watched this movie called Infinity Pool. That's just like that too. It's very similar. I was like, oh man.
Well, that like I very much appreciate Vanessa's multi-layered phenomenological description of what she's going through. That's the power of horror, right? Is you drag people to these spaces and it's like, damn, and if it's a good, what I'll call a good, and then I'll take the crap. If it's a good horror story, there's a refraction, there's a rebound, there's some way the violence fit in the story that wasn't just gratuitous violence. It was there to put the reader in a psychological state that what allows you to drag them somewhere else later on. And a good writer can pace all that so that the stuff that Vanessa's talked about, it's all there in the pacing of the writing. And when you're writing something, you use your own phenomenology to pace it. And no, I think that's all fantastic stuff. Anyone else on this image? All right, then let's see. I think, I think Stanford's next. Stanford.
Well, I mean, it's the best way to describe my take on this is continuing from, this image is actually only like 4 pages, one splash page and then 2 regular pages away from the image that we're talking about right now, that we were just talking about. And the best way for me to say why it appealed to me was just the way it made me feel. I'm paging through this. It's like, oh, that's grim, fear, agony, pain, torture, confusion. And then all of a sudden, like this, it was just, my first thought was joy, right? Like that somehow through all of this. And I actually, John, love what you did with the coloring in terms of using that like pale yellow, because that color's not used for quite some time. There's not too many pages where it's used in that type of, in that way in which it dominates the page, right? And it really sets the tone. And it's actually a very joyful color, right? And then you've got the the orange hair, you've got the dance, you've got this easy, graceful motion, and especially the last panel where it's like she's got her chest forward and it's like she's smiling. I just my first thought when I saw this was, wow, unadulterated joy in the face of agony and despair. So that's it.
Go ahead. Well, just Just a second, I get my mouse working here. What I love about the pacing here is that, don't mean to go all neuroscience here on everybody and everything, but the systems in our brain that we're using when we experience pain and joy, they're the same system, right? And they, in other words, when you put yourself in when you go through an extreme state of fear, it's much easier for the system to then suddenly collapse into the opposite, right? Yeah. Because it's a dynamical system and it's not a linear system. And so being in a state of anxiety is simultaneously not being in a state of joy. It's not like they're two different categories. It's a reorganization of the same things, what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So the pacing here to pick up on that is just, brilliant. That, yes, this is what's going to happen. And then when I talk about mine, I'll talk about a more cognitive moment that happens later. This is an emotional moment, right? This is an emotional moment of, she didn't even have to try to be in this state. It just happened because she'd been in all those horrible states for so long, and then boom. So I think the pacing is just spot on, and the colors just show us this was a qualitative shift in what she was experiencing at the time.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this image?
I would just say, I don't know if this was intentional, but I feel like I could hear that picture, and that's something that I really appreciated about it. Like,
yes, that was totally intentional.
Because the way her body moved from each frame, I was like, oh, I can hear this. So I loved everything about it. And obviously I love people with colorful hair. So
yeah, I love that. I love that too. I love the fact that, her and the little boy and this dancer had all gone through the same experience, but with different results. And it's like, and their giftings were different, and the thing that was hurt and healed was the instrument of that gift. So for the little boy, it was like he had a head injury because he's brilliant, right? For the dancer, it was her feet were probably just amputated, because you can see the little line on her feet, right? And so another one is, and then of course Chioma, her gifting is in her hands. So it's like, so she loses her hands to get them cleaned up, get those hands clean and reattached, So yeah, I love that. I love the way that they did that. That's why I love the way that Nnedi wrote that. So it's very unexpected.
So when you read a story like that, John, are you seeing it?
Yeah, a lot of times I am. Most times I am seeing it. That's one of the other things that attracted me to this particular story was I did see it so readily,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think I actually have my original printout somewhere where I actually have like the how many pages it would take to do certain scenes and stuff like that. Have it somewhere. But when I first started breaking it down, I have like notes in the margins, but at the same time reading it, I'm hearing it, I'm feeling it, experiencing it, seeing it,
Excellent. Anyone else on this image? Okay, then we'll go to the next one. The next one is mine. As I told you, I'm teaching. We just finished discussing After the Rain in a class I'm teaching, and my colleague, my friend Victor Danges Jr. is working as a collaborator in the teaching of the class, and I asked the students who were going to be participating in that evening's discussion to pick a frame. This is the one Victor chose, and he was right, so I've chosen it now. This is that cognitive moment I'm talking about, right? I mean, the moment of pure joy that Stanford picked was a moment of uncontrollable emotional reorganization. And this is the cognitive reorganization that follows. And if I go on for a bit, y'all just tell me to shut up, but what this image does is show you that she is everything and everything is her. And this is a view that we have to struggle to try to understand sometime in, I would argue, in Western individualist culture. But the women, her aunt, the women that she was dealing with throughout the story, this was the world they were trying to open her up to. This was the way of being that they knew she had to go through that pain to get to, right? And the fact that you have all the meow in the background, you don't know, quote unquote, where they are if you're going to treat this as an analytic image of a room. You've got the image of her and the boy and her aunt, it looks like, in the mirror. So different aspects of her life are juxtaposed.
Yes.
But it transcends being in a physical room, right? And it's basically who she is now. And it's this first kind of cognitive moment of realization that this is who I am. And sorry you wrote it, Ben. There are no words on this page.
No. And I
text here, but this one.
I think that it needed the text is the image, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting about this section too is that in the original story, did y'all get a chance to read the original story on the road? Did you read it?
So I'm going to say I did, but it's been a while.
Okay, so maybe you might remember this then. She doesn't manifest her powers in the short story at home. And they manifest on the plane. The first time that she knows that she can actually heal people is on the plane. And so from the end of the ordeal, right up to the point where, right to the point where she, they're jumping in the car and they see a little boy waving. That was all me and David adding those aspects. None of that's in the original story, And so, and the reason being is because, first of all, we thought very strongly that it didn't make sense for her to actually be on a plane and it happened. We were like, well, what if, it happens at home while she's upstairs before she leaves and she has all these other experiences like this. And Nnedi was cool with it. And one of the things I think that really sold her on our ideas is the fact that if you read the original story, this happens on the plane. Like she gets her power on the plane. She goes to a bathroom and she goes to the plane's bathroom, right? And she actually strips down in. You've been on a plane bathroom, on a jet.
Yeah, there's no room for me to strip.
Like, what are you going to do? And then, and this character is loosely based on Nnedi Okorafor, and so Nnedi's like close to 6 feet tall. Mostly locks. Her locks probably make her taller than 6 feet tall. Actually, so and I said, and this is something I could tell. Like it was an early story for her because it was a story logic thing that I thought was really odd. And I said, also too, it's like I don't know, not to generalize, but most women I know wouldn't get naked on a, or halfway naked in a plain bathroom unless it was totally necessary. I don't think that would happen. So all of this and it gave us this other palette to work with, as far as like the stories, like the part where like the little boy's waving goodbye to her, that was stuff like that. Just kind of switched things up a little bit. And, gave us a little bit more richness to that vibe, and got a chance to do something like this. It's a huge meta panel that wouldn't have existed. I want to speak to that too right quick. Is there's a reason why we didn't choose a novel to do either, because I wanted to try adapting a graphic novel. A short story into a graphic novel. Because with a graphic novel adaptation. A novel adaptation, you're always trying to compress information, you're always trying to make it fit, But with a short story, there's some space for expansion, and I think that's one of the things I loved about how this turned out. It was like you got a chance to expand, so you get something like this, or that image of the page with the three lizards circling, right? That page too. That wouldn't happen. Like. The whole thing about them being outside on the house, that was all like me and David thinking about like, well, how do we do this into the story? It's problem solving. So
exactly. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on this frame or?
I really love the use of the masks. I love the way. They're like off panel, but they're still, but it's clear that they're part of the world behind the mirror. I love the way that this is also about the way there's so many frames in this splash page. And it harkens back to what I was saying about the opening image, right? Is this way in which we're able to hold so many, it's the holding all of these planes in existence that creates this really beautiful tension.
Mm. Yeah, I just love the mirror as meta panel so much too. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mass as well, and we just kind of riffed off of Nnedi's original design for, thought process around what the road monster looks like. With the mask and the rest of his rocky body, like this kaiju mask wearing kaiju. Which she uses again in Lagoon, by the way. Lagoon, yeah. Like I said, I feel like this story was like very generative for her as a writer, and that's one of the reasons that I was really attracted to it. It's like an early Nnedi's working through some things in this story kind of narrative.
No, it is incredibly bold. It is an incredibly bold short story. You mentioned adding a few things to the story. Just as a writer, did that also have to do with the idea of pacing? That you felt you need to move a little further psychologically before you get on the plane, go through some different things.
Yeah, and a lot of it was pacing, and also first of all, you have a contract to write a certain page of a book, right? And it's just it's very it's like that. It's a contract. It's like.
Yeah,
if you have a 200-page book in your contract, guess what? You're writing a 200-page book. Right?
Exactly.
So if it's too long, it's too short, you have to fix that. And so when we came out with it, it was I think we were like a little bit over 100 pages done. And so I was like, wait, to do for the book, and I was like, well, the contract's 128. So how do we actually do different things to expand the story in a meaningful way? That's not just tacked on. It actually seems like it's more seamless.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what we wanted to do, and it gave us some space to actually have some conversations with other writers, and like for instance, like the part where she goes into the bush, and she sees the the masquerades, the giant masquerades. Yeah, that doesn't happen in a short story. Yeah, it's all. Like, hey, this should be really interesting. Let's get us some early magical things jumping off, She tumbles down a hill, and, all that stuff is, just me and David riffing off of each other. So, and Nnedi too, by the way.
No, I get you. It doesn't feel forced, just to let you know, as a reader, it all flowed, at least for me, it flowed extremely well.
We're trying to make sure the pacing is solid,
Yeah, that's the skill, right? And then you got to just do it, look at it, write it over, as Eric was saying earlier, construction, deconstruction, over and over to get it right. Our next panel is Vanessa's. So I'm going to share that.
That'd be awesome. I'm just kidding. I'm sure it is.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I feel like I picked a safe panel because, like I said, I was having a whole experience when I was reading this, and I was trying to think about. There were some other ones that I thought about picking that I was like, how am I going to put the way I feel about this into words? So this was the one I feel like I can clearly articulate. So let me just throw that out there. And so what I really appreciated about this, actually, it's in the text. And I had sort of like an experience because I read this, I was coming off of having a conversation about Wakanda Forever with someone. And we were talking about in the film where they refer to African Americans as the lost tribe. And I was like, when I heard that, I was like, whoo, it was kind of like a little, oh gosh. And so reading this panel where she's talking about, I'm Nigerian American. I'm a Nigerian American, Nigerian American. Yes. I had a moment because I was thinking about how for so many descendants of enslaved Africans, we don't know that. Like, am I Nigerian? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? And I had a moment where I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about it in terms of how many people don't experience this sense of wholeness because they don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a beautiful story about coming to appreciate sort of like the holistic nature of identity
Yes.
And I'm so cynical and like whatever. I'm always thinking like a therapist, like, what about the other side of that, which is people who don't experience that wholeness? And I was even thinking about it for myself. I don't want to do no ancestry DNA. I don't want to know where my ancestors were stolen from. You know what I'm saying? Like it was just this really touched me because it kind of was like, what am I missing, or what are people missing who don't understand this part of their history? We as descendants of enslaved Africans understand the horrid nature of what happened. Is there a way that we can, again, sort of like we talked about earlier, thinking about violence in a different way? Is there a way that we can, like she did in this story, understand that holistically? Like this just really spoke to me. And again, it was more so the text, but that is why I chose this frame, because that sort of holistic nature and sort of like a cohesive identity really spoke to me as a therapist and a psychologist, and also as just an African-American person, and not knowing if I in my life will ever have this experience of understanding where my ancestors came from. You know what I'm saying?
No, I definitely do. And, it's funny. And that makes me feel really great because, that whole scene wasn't in a short story. Yeah. What happened was, when we were figuring out different ways to kind of like ease out of the story, and think differently about it, and kind of like give. Some people didn't like it. I mean, I remember one review was like, "Oh, it kind of spoiled the ending." I was like, "No. Some people actually need that connection. Actually, understand like this is what just happened, right? Don't assume just because you get something, everybody gets it, So, not to be redundant about anything, but I wanted to make sure that that we drove the point home in a subtle manner, And what I did is I pretended. I said, "Okay, I'm writing a scene. I'm Nnedi Okorafor, and I tried to write as Nnedi, and she loved it. She thought it was like she really liked it a lot. So I was like, okay, so that played out really well. But yeah, that was totally like just original. That's not it. That's new. That's a new scene, So that means a great deal to me. So thank you for that.
She also makes it clear that she's keeping that thought to herself in the car.
Yes. Yep.
So it's this very personal moment of integration. And she's in a car about to leave the place where she became integrated. All these things are in motion. It fits extremely well. The image of the little boy, I'll share it again.
He's so creepy, but also whimsical.
He's so creepy.
He's so creepy.
Yeah, well, yeah, but he looks like a little 10-year-old kid who's just playing with his truck, saying bye. I mean, he looks happy.
He does look happy, but he also looks like he's standing in the woods, like
he does.
You know what I'm saying? It's just that, and the thing is, it's like there's the idea of the bush is something that's really important to certain cultures in West Africa, right? That's where ghosts live in the spirit world, and and what you said earlier, Scott, about like the living and the dead and the spiritual and the quote unquote real being right up against each other, is a very real cultural meaning there, and I love that too.
So I'm going to ask you about her eyes then, because when she's looking back at him, waving to him, her eyes are a little bigger, right? In other words,
she's right. Yeah,
exactly. And he said,
she's happy.
Yeah, and her image is identifying with him in a way, right? I've not seen her drawn that way before.
Everything comes together. In fact, that's one of my favorite things too, is that up until the deconstruction on the road, the pages are very chaotic. There's a lot of darkness. Obviously, like the spirit world is living in the gutters, and creeping into reality. It's very, very disconcerting, But once she goes through her transformation, her hair is nice and it's brighter. So using that yellow you were talking about at Stanford, and also like we have more yellow in the pages, then more white space, and then you see the panels start to become less and less chaotic and more traditional. And you'll see that as by the time you get to the airplane, like they're calm, She feels it's very orderly, everything is right with the world, so to speak, and that was very intentional. And we just spent hours just thinking about stuff like this. Okay, so what we do with the panels here to make it feel, because it's very much a part of the storytelling piece. Stanford mentioned earlier that, comics have this inherent surreal quality to them, and that's something that I definitely agree with and I love about the medium. But also, one of the things I love as well is the fact that every aspect of a comic book page can be a vehicle for generative narrative,
Yep.
And that's from the page layout to the line work to how many panels on the page, pacing, everything. It's such this beautiful. It's such a beautiful medium. I just love it. There's nothing like it. It's nothing like the way that comics tell stories.
Well, that's the academic world is actually starting to pick up on that, right?
Yes, particularly.
That in the class I'm teaching, we call it othering. Usually we use the phrase othering to refer to social relationships and such. But if you look at the layout of a comic page, all the frames are othering each other. They're gaining their meaning relationally in terms of the context you've created. And the evil scheme is to get my students to experience more and more reality relationally, right? And to experience themselves relationally. And what I love about what you just said is the frames are not as chaotic, yet the bush is still in her.
Yes.
So in other words,
Right.
it's not, didn't leave and she's just happy now. She's
come to grips. She's come to, it's like, it reminds me of the ending of the Babadook. I don't know if you've seen the Babadook, right? Like the movie is about trauma. It's about dealing with trauma. And of course, all horror, trauma is part of horror, whether it's either psychological or physical. It's part of the deal. You're traumatized in some fashion. And so what I like about that film so much is that once you realize that it's about like a particular mental state that could come from the loss of someone very close to you, that never goes away. It never goes away. If you love someone dearly and they're taken from you in some fashion, you have to constantly deal with managing trauma every day, and sometimes you feed it, sometimes it keeps you warm, and sometimes it terrifies you. And so you have to come to grips with that, and I thought that was just such a beautiful statement. And so, I was trying to integrate that same kind of idea in this, and make it a true, like, yes, it's a self-realization thing, but there are some horrible things that happened to Chioma in this story. She's totally tortured and traumatized in various ways, and I remember reading the story, like when that roar happens, when the thing comes out of the back of the house, it's like roar, and she's like, I'm out. It's like deuces, and then all the lizards are there, I was like, man, she was hauling butt, man. I was like, oh my God. And I could totally feel it. I wanted to get that into the comic, That's one of my favorite scenes too, color-wise too, because the purples and the oranges are popping off each other, I'm gonna stop talking.
No. You mentioned the lizards. We haven't talked about the lizards at all. When I talked about this story with my class, I actually picked one of the lizard scenes as my favorite panel because the lizards are giving agency to us as readers of the bush, right? They're giving They're giving that agency to us that we don't see if we don't live there. And I loved how, she said they're looking at me to see, like, they think something's going to happen. That's her. They're just being lizards. Right?
That's right. They are, but also there is this thing where, like, they are also, there's a certain point where their lizardness becomes unfettered when the natural and the unnatural, so to speak, or the spirit world and the real world collide, and they're allowed to actually have a lot more agency, right?
Yeah.
And then also too, one of my favorite parts is when she's sitting on the porch reading, and they all start coming. It's hundreds of them, and they're admiring her, and they know that she's next, and they're kind of like paying homage to her, but she's taking them as like, oh no, something's horrible about to happen. It's like yes and no at the same time, actually.
Yeah.
Like, what? I'm gonna go in the house.
That's what you got to love about art is you've got an image of a bunch of lizards running after a woman, Yet what we experience is this collective agency. You know, we actually experience a collective agency moving towards her, as you said, targeting her. And so even though we can describe the scene as a bunch of lizards chasing a woman phenomenologically, in terms of what I'm experiencing this collective agency coming at her. I guess I said the same thing twice in a row. I'm sorry, I'll shut up.
Well, the funny thing is when I was reading this, this page was actually the page that I almost submitted. Like it was second to the joy one, right? Is where she's running out the house, and it's because of the dialogue. You know, she says, "I ran out of the house. It was after me, not my grandmother and auntie. At least I could save them. I surprised myself. I really was one of those people who would happily die to save the ones they love."
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of my favorite. That's directly from Nnedi too. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. That line, because it was just also the way it comes out. It's not that she even saw herself as say, "Wow, that's what I'm all about." And
it was like, I guess I am okay. Well, if I die, I'm cool with it because I saved my people that I love. Exactly. Yeah, she's a hero. Yeah. You know? Yeah, and I was like, I like that. That's one of my favorite lines too. Actually, that's the other thing too is we try to keep as much of Nnedi's dialogue as humanly possible. You know, even to the point even to the point of redundancy. You know, we're like, no, it's because we're two men, working with this with a character who's a woman who's a woman of Nigerian descent, who had a very particular voice, and she chooses her words very wisely, and so we're like, okay, I don't want to cut too many words, that kind of thing, right? And we were chastised in some reviews for that, but I was like, I would rather be chastised for it than actually create a space where Nnedi was not satisfied with the adaptation, and that kind of thing. So these are types of things you have to come through. Sometimes you do need to actually have a picture say instead of tell, right? I mean, say something instead of be descriptive. So,
hey guys, I've got a bunch of questions here. We're going to jump into questions now. All righty then. Sir Trevor Coleman says, "I apologize having joined late in the writing style of After the Rain, Junji Ito-esque, or was the comparison made in regard to the hypergraphic illustrations?"
Oh, probably the latter, right?
Well, that and the page turn, the whole comic, exploiting the degrees of freedom you have when you write a comic. And, Eric pulls that scene out, and that page turn is what I experience quite often when I read Junji Ito. So it's more of that. Another question from Beccanelli. Question for John. What was your thought process with the mask page in terms of the use of color? I find it interesting that there are so many similar colors used, but readers are able to see so many different images in one.
So was it the mask page with the meta image, or was it the one where she's actually going through the ordeal in the middle? Because that's a lot of memorial there too.
Yeah, I got you. I don't know.
I think I think they're referencing the one that we showed.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was your thought process with the mask page in terms of the use of color?
So here's the thing. So one thing about it is it's a nocturnal page. So you have to think about the local phenomenon, like you said, phenomenology or local things that's happening, right? Is that, okay, it's at night. So how is that going to change how colors are? We were kind of using these really rich purples as part of the supernaturalness of the images. It's like, for instance, when she goes into this memory, of her having to kill this guy with her bare hands. It's very purple, because it's her remembering, but memory is also not the most, you can't depend on your memory. You know what I'm saying? It's unreliable, Yeah. And so I like it. So it's more like a dream in some ways, right? And then
very much so.
Yeah. And so the other thing is, people misremember all the time. It happened to me today. My wife was like, "Hey, you remember the other day?" I was like, "Okay, first of all, our minds are not the same, woman. They're not the same. Like her mind is like a bookshelf, and then mine is like you take the books off the shelf and you stack them and have the top one on it. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah, I know exactly what
yeah,
you're
I'm
saying.
like, no. And you know this, we've been married almost a decade, and why do you still ask me that? Never mind, sorry.
Yeah.
On my channel. Anyway, so yeah, so the
Yeah.
coloring of that was mostly dealing with like trying to set up a color scheme that actually represented a particular thing. You know, like when she's in the bush of ghosts, it's very different. It's very purple, it's blues, you know, stuff like that, right? And so that's the color symbolism that we set up. So that was you know, and so that was kind of like the color hole we put on as kind of this burgundy and things like that, because we wanted to keep it tight like that. So
The next question comes from Olivia Hauser. Like you said earlier, it is difficult to scare people and evoke as much of a visceral reaction to a story through comics rather than through the film. Naturally, we as readers may have other ideas about what types of narratives and reactions are warranted for. Hold on, I'm reading it and someone else asked the question. Naturally, we as readers may have other ideas about what types of narrative and reactions are warranted for different types of media.
mm-hmm.
In what creative ways do you like to portray certain patterns and distinctions through these comic narratives that help to overcome those borders and bring stronger emotional reactions to the reader? That's a lot, man.
No, it is. Well, I mean, no, it is, but it also too, it's a great question. And it's like, I like working in horror because, again, as Eric stated earlier, you know, there's a spectrum of different types of horror. You know, it's a very, very diverse genre, you know, in that regard, like psychological horror, you know, body horror, all cosmic horror, all these different types of experiences. And so knowing that, you have to say, okay, what is it about the comic medium that can actually get the best out of these particular experiences, you know? Because I can show you like examples of comics that are replicating, you know, these different types of genres very easily. You know, cosmic horror, you check out Nameless. Wow. I'm like, yo, I don't want to read that no more. I was like, what the heck am I looking at? Anyway, and so what you're trying to do is understand that, first of all, like when you adapt something, you're going to change it. Because it really means like transformation or changing. Like you adapt something, it's actually about mutability, right? It's first thing. The other thing is understanding the affordances of the original format, right? And understanding the affordances of the format that you're putting it into, you know, because something's going to change. But you have to understand like the medium of comics really intimately to understand like what the best things you can get out of the experience. And those are the types of questions that I'm trying to wrestle with when I'm doing adaptation, you know. Did that make sense?
Oh, it made great sense to me. I mean, how many bad movies have we seen based on books, right? Because they don't convert the phenomenology of the book into the phenomenology of the medium of movies.
There you go.
Yeah, just don't do that work. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and it's exactly what it is. It's lazy, right? You know,
I'm gonna call it lazy, but I've never written a movie, so
okay, fair enough. I'll go. I won't say lazy, but like for instance, you know, classic example of something like that is Ang Lee's Hulk movie to me, which a train wreck of a movie. I was like, what the heck? Yeah, because he was using the form of comics to be what comics are, and that's a very, you know, he was trying to make the content of the form. You know, make form of content the same thing, and it just failed because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah. And
in particular, like in movies, you've got to have a good team. You've got to have a good director, good actors, good writers, and you have to have a great editor.
Yeah,
who knows how to put the phenomenology, create the pace.
I have a great DP, man. You have a great DP. You know,
exactly.
Can I ask a question about that? I know we have a lot of questions, so I don't want to go on a tangent about that. But me and my mom argue about this a lot, about how Stephen King doesn't adapt well to film because of the way that he writes. And I'm wondering, is that the filmmakers? Is that just his style of writing? Is you're not going to get a good movie out of that? But we talk about that all the time, about how I don't know that they have successfully adapted any Stephen King story to a really good film, and I think it's because
wait. There's some, man. There's some. So you didn't like? Okay, never mind.
Which one?
Well, he didn't. He didn't like The Shining himself, but I love The Shining.
Stanley Kubrick's
Shining. Yeah, I also like the follow up a lot too. Actually, I loved
Dr. Dream.
Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep. Great. I love that movie.
Well, what about?
Oh no, but she didn't answer a question. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I think that making a film has a lot of different constraints that are very different than writing a novel, where you're like Stephen King is the DP, he is the cinematographer, he is all these different things. The movie making process is so arduous and kind of insane, actually.
Yeah, for real.
Who came up with this process? Because essentially when you're making a movie, like you're shooting 3 movies at the same time and editing it. It's like, okay, we're gonna shoot it here, we're gonna shoot it there, we're gonna shoot it this way. And like, okay, give me some more light over here. And then you kind of figure it out and edit it together, right? It's not like a straightforward process. And so it's so different, that's what it's like. If you could pull movies making, to me, even a bad movie is like really difficult to make. That's why I have I have a lot of forgiveness for filmmakers usually, because it's a terrible process, and we're so demanding and picky, you know what I'm saying?
We certainly are.
But no, but I think it's on the filmmaker side, because the filmmaker has to really, really digest the material and then give us something different, which is why I like The Shining so much, actually, because it's, I love the fact that Stephen King didn't like it. He's like, I didn't care for this movie. I was like, you crazy. First of all. The other one is Carrie. Carrie, I thought was great too. Actually, that's a good adaptation.
I actually thought the made for TV It was pretty good too.
Yeah,
made for TV.
Not as good as the 2 movies. I'm sorry.
Do you like those?
I liked them a lot, actually.
Okay,
I thought they were well done.
Yeah.
Of course, not like I did have my issues with them. I see your face, but no, I did have my issues.
Okay. I'm just saying, compared to the story, there's no way you could capture the beauty of that story.
But you got to get it. The thing is, you have to let that go, though. You have to go in. You have to go in. You're not going to ever have a good experience then. You know what I'm saying? That's on you. That's on you. That's the answer. That's the answer.
I'm the problem.
The answer is actually
so now that we have discovered, we have diagnosed.
Yeah, it's like you got to let it go.
Yeah,
it's going to be different. It's like the Marvel people. It's like, oh my God, that's not how Peter Parker's web shooters work. I'm like, yeah. So anyway,
yeah.
I think that's where
we got to move. Let's move on to make sure I get these students. No, I'm just going to make sure I get the
Eric's
student.
really quiet, and he was about to say something though. I'm not going to. Okay,
I got to make sure I get these students.
I know. Okay, I'm gonna shut up.
Get the students. We'll come back later.
I'm gonna shut up.
Come back. No,
it's your show. I'm shutting up.
No.
I'm shutting up.
All right. So Amber Stojak asks, how would changing the comic from color to black and white change the view on othering and show us the contrast in the story?
That's hard.
For example, would we be able to take the scene where she's being targeted by the lizards as that, or would it be harder to differentiate because it's not in color? Would the relationship look different?
I don't, it's interesting because the lizards because those lizards are particular to, they're indigenous to that area.
Mm-hmm.
They are multicolored like that. Losing the color would take away one level of recognition of what those things are, if you've been to that space, you know what I'm saying? So that's one thing I'd be concerned about. I think though, symbolically and storytelling wise, I don't know if it would affect it that much. In fact, in some ways, I prefer that's one reason I like Ginger Ito's work, by the way. You don't hear my child screaming in the background? It's wild, right? Anyway, black and white actually is really powerful for storytelling because of the fact that it automatically puts you in another space, because guess what? We don't live in a black and white world.
Right.
So if you step into a black and white comic book, then you're like, oh, this is strange. This is already. So maybe it would even amplify it, Who's to say?
There you go. Well, I guess you'll have to do a black and white version and make it an empirical issue, and then we'll
All I
figure
got
it
to
out.
do is print it out in black and white. What? No.
Well, to add to that, though, your comment about the lizards and the color and their connection to the bush and the world,
Yeah,
you would lose that in black and white.
you would.
You would lose that in black and white.
You lose the texture, like the textiles, and like
Yeah.
people have seen like the market scene and be like, "Man, I felt like I was really in a market," that kind of thing. That's
And
good.
that's one of the things that we're talking about in the class is every dimension is utilized as a way to create a contrast.
Color is like the soundtrack to a comic book to me.
All right, I'm writing that down. That's chapter 3 of my next book. So we answered that one. And then Jason Dedios says, Dr. Stanford, have you ever been told that you look like Scottie Pippen? That's what they wrote, man. And he says, I like the point you made as well. So it's really not a question, but it is a question.
Well, I think the real question isn't how I feel. I think it's about how Scottie Pippen feels about looking like me.
That's what I was gonna say.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So those are the questions we have so far. So Eric, why don't you pick up where we were in the conversation about adaptations?
So I'm lots of thoughts because I love all the movies and stories you're all talking about. But going back specifically to the medium of comics, one of my favorite Stephen King stories is The Stand. I've seen both adaptations, the made-for-TV and the HBO Max version. I've read the book, and I've read the graphic novels that Marvel put out. I've read those multiple times, and out of all of it, I've often felt like the graphic novels were I'll say best, and put that in quotes for me, because I felt like it captured the best of both mediums, right? So I think earlier, John, you had said, using a picture to say what the text might otherwise say.
Yeah.
In a movie, you've got what you can show, however long you have.
That's right.
In the text, you put out all the details in words, and then the reader paints the picture.
Yep.
Here is just this perfect synergy, and it also allows the artist a little bit of creativity to embellish on things that the author didn't say.
That's right. That's exactly right. And like the death flower, for instance. Or like being able to illustrate what it feels like to have something creeping, and the tension of saying like, okay, well, the panels are the real world and the gutters are like the spirit world, right? That's something she couldn't do in that short story.
Nope.
And it's one of my favorite things about it. It's like it was totally encroaching. It's like somebody in one of the reviewers said it made them feel like so claustrophobic because there was no white space, because of the fact that everything was covered. It's like, wow, that's exactly what we're trying to get across.
No, it's
I
fantastic.
totally agree with you on that.
All righty then. I was going to say something. Back in the day when I was a bit younger and they didn't call it animation, they called it cartoons, right? I loved cartoons, and I still love cartoons. And as I've gotten older, I had a friend of mine, a movie maker. He's not a friend of mine. He's a struggling actor out in LA, but he said, "What's your favorite movie?" And I said, "You're not going to like the answer." And he said, "Why?" It goes, "Because it's Princess Mononoke by Hayao Miyazaki, and there are no moving humans, and there are no actors." And what I appreciate about comics, what I appreciate about even written text, and what I appreciate about comics is that nothing's for free. You put a camera on a scene, and you're getting unbelievable amounts of content for free. Right. You work at the lighting, you work in the acting, but people in motion, you get all those body dynamics for free. You get the facial expressions for free. But in animation, you have to do it all. And I love the challenge. And so when people give me crap for being a cartoon watcher, I tell them, well, this art is more difficult. And of course, it's just more difficult.
It's extremely difficult. It's arduous, and it doesn't love you. Seriously, it's like one of the most, animation and comics are like some of the most unforgiving media, depending if you're working on a team or by yourself. You look at something like Monsters. Have you seen Monsters, the book by what's his name? Shoot, he did Weapon X. What's his name? Barry Windsor Smith.
Man, you won your own quiz.
Yeah, thank you. That is incredible. I'm like, that thing is wild. It was like, it's what, 500 pages? It took him 30 years to do because he would do it in fits and starts, That's a commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question following up on that in terms of the work of being a visual artist. And I've often wondered what percentage, how much footage ends up on the floor, right? So, how much of the work that you see, what percentage of paper is there beyond the number of pages that just got thrown away?
That's a lot.
I mean, it's got to be at least equal, right? If you got 50 pages,
it's probably more because, like I said, I actually paid model. I actually I had someone to shoot the entire rendition because I was using live models to actually be the characters, and I didn't even know using that.
Right.
Yeah. That was an entire version of the comic that I had I still have the images because I paid for them, but it was that was crazy because I'm gonna do this realistically. I went through the whole process, and didn't have the time to do it. Right. I mean, I pretty much adapted the story. I designed the creature, like the world monster thing. David, put his amazing spin on it, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of planning, At first, it was with another publisher as well, and I took it from them. When I got the green light that we're going to be doing, this imprint, I was like, okay, well, I really adore you, and I need to probably take this to my own imprint. It would be smarter, and they understood. So yeah. So it was a lot. It's a lot of things, man.
Yeah. Well, there has to be the comic book equivalent of take. When you're shooting a movie, take 23, take 24, right? All that footage, you never see it ends up.
There's a lot of people that redraw stuff, who are like, nope, didn't like that angle, or I tend to be like, I have a deadline and I can't be drawing the same image over a million times. And if it's crazy looking, then, that's what
good thing I'm doing horror.
Right. One of my friends said, Ezra Clayton Daniels, was a good friend, is a wonderful cartoonist and writer, said that whatever you draw badly is your style.
Oh, there you go. That's chapter 4. Whatever you
draw badly. I was like, that is such a good, it's so great. It's so smart.
I'm never going to have a drawing style then because I'm never going to let people see what I draw.
Do fumetti, man. Do fumetti.
Exactly. So, Janet, do we have any other questions?
We do not.
Okay, then. John, are there any final words you want to share with us about After the Rain or anything else that you'd like to talk about?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me again. I'm sorry that I was I'm very tired. I've been up since 5 writing. I have this book out called Ghostlight from Marvel, and I just thank you. I just had I just finished my first draft of the last chapter, and I was like, oh, it's kind of melancholy. I love those characters, so that's one thing. The other thing is as far as After the Rain goes, is we have it in hardcover and softcover. I think I would prefer the softcover because it has the making of, it has the interview with Nnedi and stuff like that in it. So it has the extras, like the DVD extras. You can actually see some of the images of my fits and starts on the project. Which is pretty cool. Megascope is getting ready to put out a brand, some other new stuff. We just put out Queenie, which is a book about Stephanie St. Clair, who was a notorious gangster who was Bumpy Johnson's mentor. It's pretty awesome. And we're getting ready to put out a Afrofuturist version of the Count of Monte Cristo. It's called The Last Count of Monte Cristo, which I'm very excited about. And also Hugo Canuto's Tales of the Orishas book, which it was originally published by him in Portuguese, and translated over to English, and It's like if Jack Kirby was from Bahia, if he was from Brazil. So imagine
Right.
that. That's what it is. So,
No, that's fantastic. That's
so, yeah.
fantastic.
Check us out. Check us out. Working
All
hard.
righty. Well, first of all, Vanessa and Eric, thanks again. I started the habit of thanking the ReggieCon crew members for being here last time. Thanks for your contributions. Stanford, as always, it was a pleasure to chat all things comics with you again.
Thank you for having me.
And John, it's a professional honor and a personal pleasure to have you here with us, celebrating Black History Month with a discussion of this amazing story.
I loved it. Thank you so much. And I would definitely come back and, want to get out there in person as soon as I can. So thank you.
There you go. Thanks to all of you out in the audience for attending. And of course, thanks to our friends behind the scenes who do everything they can to make us look like we know what we're doing. So thanks once again to our special guest, Stanford and John. And until next time, have a good evening.